My husband and I live in a very rural part of Washington state. We're surrounded by farms and trees, and our closest neighbor is a few minutes down the road. We've been on this property for 10 years, and it's still the best purchase we've ever made. My husband has a small business repairing small engines and tractors. He's mostly mobile and is usually out at farms, homes, and other small businesses, and he can fix just about anything from lawnmowers, chainsaws, and pressure washers to generators and four-wheelers. 8 years ago, we had our first and only child, our son Oliver. Everything about my pregnancy was normal, and from day one, he was perfect. He was big like his dad, strong and alert, and started sleeping through the night at 4 months old. I remember being so thankful we'd had such a healthy, easy baby. But when he was about 18 months old, we had a very weird night, and I didn't realize how important it was until just recently. It was a normal Friday night, and we had just had dinner, then started getting ready for a movie, which was kind of our Friday night routine. Around 8 or 8:30, I had put Oliver to bed, and my husband had to run out to his truck to bring in one of his toolboxes. Just a minute or two after he went outside, I heard him call me to come and see something. I remember walking out to the driveway and seeing him standing there staring straight up into the sky. When I asked him what he wanted, he pointed straight up above our property, and maybe 1,000 feet up there were 3 small lights that were going around in a circle. They weren't going fast, just a slow circle, like they were rotating around something. We stood there watching it for maybe a minute, trying to figure out what it could be. The second we started talking about what might be up there, the lights went out. It wasn't like a slow fade, they just shut off and we couldn't see anything after that. We definitely thought it was weird, but weren't really worried or scared at all. It was just strange. My husband said it could have been a balloon with lights on it that had gotten away from someone, and that was a good enough explanation for me, so we went back inside. Back in the house and about halfway through our movie, we saw several bright flashes of light coming from outside. It wasn't like headlights, they were bright enough to light up our entire living room. Kind of like flashes of lightning would, but more intense. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 seconds total, with 3 or 4 bursts of light. My husband sat up and said it looked like a transformer blew up. I didn't think we had any out where we were, but he went outside to see what was going on, and I stayed in the house because Oliver had just started crying from his room. When I got to him, he was standing in his crib screaming. He wasn't just upset, he was screaming like he was in pain. I was trying to calm him down by holding him while rocking and singing. Then I tried giving him a bottle, but he wouldn't stop. He just kept crying and clinging to me. After what I'm guessing was about 10 minutes, my husband came back in the house and said he didn't see anything outside. He walked our entire property, but everything seemed fine. That night, we spent hours trying to get Oliver to settle down. He wouldn't sleep, wouldn't stop crying, and seemed extremely distressed. We couldn't even figure out what was wrong with him. It wasn't until 3 o'clock in the morning, when I was close to taking him into the ER, that he finally started to calm down. The next day, he slept all the way through the morning and most of the afternoon. We thought maybe it had been a stomach issue or that he was getting sick, but when he woke up that evening, he seemed perfectly fine again, so we didn't really think much more about it. It had been a weird night, but we just moved on. But not long after that, about 3 weeks later, we started noticing changes in him. He stopped responding to his name like he used to. At first, we thought he was just distracted or focused on something else, but it became more consistent. Then we realized he wasn't pointing at things anymore, which was weird because he really loved to point at things that he wanted or to draw our attention to something, and it stopped completely. He also stopped making eye contact, which was especially noticeable because he had always had strong eye contact as a baby. As more time went by, he stopped trying to say new words and was easily overwhelmed by noises and lights, and I was getting seriously concerned. I didn't want to overreact, but something in me knew we needed to get him checked out. Our regular pediatrician listened to our concerns, and he referred us to a developmental pediatrician. More weeks went by, but we eventually got the diagnosis: autism spectrum disorder. Getting that diagnosis changed everything for us. Our schedules, our priorities, and how we thought about his future. We got him into an early intervention program, started therapies, and adapted our lives around his needs. Over the years, there were ups and downs, but it's also been amazing to watch him grow and develop in his own way. Jumping back to the present time, Oliver recently turned 8. He's high functioning, he goes to school, and does many of the same things other kids his age do. He is extremely intelligent, especially with numbers and memory, but a few weeks ago, he started saying something new that was completely out of left field, and it really caught me off guard. He came to me while I was folding laundry and asked me to check him for tracking devices. I asked him what he meant by that, and he told me very matter-of-factly that he had been abducted by aliens when he was younger, and he needed me to check and make sure they didn't leave anything inside of him. At first, I thought it was just something he picked up from TV or at school, but he was dead serious. I didn't want to dismiss him, so I grabbed this plastic handle of a lint roller I had sitting in the laundry room that didn't have a sticky part on it anymore, and I told him I would scan him. I waved the handle over his arms, back, legs, and head, just trying to make him feel heard. Then when I was done, I told him there was nothing there. He nodded, very seriously said thank you, and went right back to what he was doing like nothing happened. I thought it was just a one-time thing, but now it's become a weekly routine. About once a week, he'll come to me and ask me for a scan. I always use the same lint roller handle and wave it over him like before, and every time he thanks me and goes back to whatever he was doing. He seems completely satisfied each time, but I can't help worrying about it. I'm starting to wonder what to do when he's older and realizes it's just a piece of plastic. The worst part about this new thing happened just last week. While I was cooking dinner, he came into the kitchen and asked for the scan again. I dried my hands, grabbed the handle, did the usual sweep, and he said thank you and went back out to the living room to watch cartoons. But right after he walked out, a memory hit me. The memory was about the night when he was 18 months old when we saw the lights above our property, then had the extremely bright flashes interrupt our movie. Then I thought about him screaming and crying like something was wrong just seconds after that, and everything that followed with the long, hard night, the strange behavioral changes, and the autism diagnosis. And now, years later, he's convinced he was taken when he was young and wants me to check him for devices. In my head, it suddenly lined up, and you can call me crazy, but for the first time, I felt genuinely scared about what might have happened to him. I really don't know what to think, and I don't know what to believe. I've always been a practical, grounded person, but I can't help feeling like there's a connection between all of those things. My husband has told me not to worry about it and that nothing is connected, but it's overwhelming to me. I keep putting pieces together that feel too specific to be random coincidence, but I can't say any of it out loud without sounding like I've lost my mind. I haven't told anyone else other than my husband. Not yet anyway. I'm scared to take him into someone to talk about it because of what they might say. I'm also scared they'll think something's wrong with him, or with me, but I can't unsee the pattern now, and I can't stop wondering, what if Oliver is right? This isn't exactly my story, but it's one that's been in my family for as long as I can remember. I've heard it retold so many times by every person involved that I feel like I lived it myself. It happened before I was born, sometime in the mid-1980s, but I've gone over the details with my parents, my brother, and my sister over the years, and the story has never changed. That consistency is what makes it so strange and believable to me. I'm going to give a little background on my family because I think it matters here. My parents are extremely religious. The kind of religious where even talking about something like UFOs or aliens isn't just dismissed, it's seen as potentially evil or demonic even. Both of my parents have always been very straightforward, no-nonsense people. My dad has been a mechanic his entire life, and my mom worked in a medical office but is now retired. Neither of them ever buys into weird ideas or conspiracy theories, and they're skeptical of most of what they hear in the news or even from science when it goes against their beliefs. They don't believe in evolution or the age of the universe, if that gives you a sense of their worldview. For them to have the experience they had and to stick by it all these years has always stood out to me. Not only would they never make up a story like this, but I'm sure they've worried about being ridiculed or looked at differently in their church and community if the story ever made it out of the family. The way they tell it, it was in the middle of summer. They had just gotten back from a family reunion that was earlier in the day and at their church, but they had stayed for a few extra hours to help clean up. I don't know the exact time, but my mom says it was in the early evening when they got home, so probably around 5 or 6 p.m. It was still light out, and she remembers it being a little overcast. Not rainy, just kind of a gray, hazy sky. At the time, my sister was 9 and my brother was 6. The two of them were outside riding their bikes around the driveway and in an empty field that sat next to the house. It was just a normal summer evening. According to both my parents, my sister came running into the house yelling for them to come out and look at something. She was loud and excited and said there was something huge in the sky. My dad was the first one out the door, and when he looked up, he said it took him a second to even register what he was seeing. My mom came out behind him, and they both stood there staring at this massive object slowly making its way across the sky from south to north. They describe it as triangular, dark in color but also metallic looking and enormous. Bigger than any plane or blimp they'd ever seen. The part that got my dad was that it made no sound. It was just slowly moving through the air. He says it looked like it had windows or panels along the underside, but no lights were on it that he could see, and it wasn't blinking or flashing in any way. Before it was directly overhead, they did actually think that it had to be some kind of blimp or dirigible, but as it got closer, they both said it was clearly solid and metallic, and it wasn't shaped like anything that could be filled with a gas. It was flat and wide, and it moved like nothing they'd ever seen. The speed of it was slow, and it was low enough that they could easily have seen details on the bottom, like seams or lines if it had had any, but it didn't. My brother, who was still riding his bike, seemed oblivious to what was going on, but once my parents realized it was coming directly over the house, my mom yelled for him to come in. He turned his bike around and started pedaling toward the house, and that's when something happened that none of them could explain. Just as my brother was riding up toward the driveway, everyone heard a sharp sound. My dad describes it as a single deep pulse, almost like a compressed air cannon, but huge. Not loud like an explosion, but a heavy wave of pressure. The second they heard it, my brother suddenly fell off his bike. According to my mom, he didn't just fall over, he collapsed. His bike skidded out from underneath him, and he hit the ground hard and was screaming in pain. She said he was grabbing at his back and crying uncontrollably. My dad immediately ran out, picked him up off the ground, and rushed him into the house. He said my brother was shaking and crying so much that he couldn't explain what had happened, only that something hit him and his skin was burning. My sister stayed by the back sliding glass door the whole time, watching the object continue on its path. She said it passed right over the house, kept going for a short distance, and then began to go up into the clouds until it was completely out of view. Inside the house, my brother was still screaming that something had hit him. He was holding his back and saying it felt like it was on fire. When my parents pulled his shirt off, he had a bright red rash all over his back and shoulders. They say it looked like a sunburn, but it had appeared instantly, and there hadn't even been any direct sun that day, especially not enough for something like that to happen. My parents didn't know what to do, so they put cold towels on him, and after that used aloe vera for a few days. He had trouble sleeping that night because the pain wouldn't stop, and my mom says he was crying off and on for most of the evening, but over the next couple of days his rash faded and he slowly got better. My brother told me years later that he still remembers it, and it felt like he had been hit by a car. That's how he describes it. He said it was like being slammed into from behind and then lit on fire. He's in his 40s now and perfectly healthy, but he says he'll never forget the feeling of it. After that, things just kind of went back to normal. My parents never even considered reporting it to anyone, and it became a strange family story that would get brought up occasionally in our circle, but never in any kind of public situation. We were also strongly discouraged from talking about it with our friends or at school. They really didn't want anyone to know. Over the years, I've asked my parents and siblings about it separately, and every time, the story is exactly the same. The details and the sequence of events is always the same, and no one ever adds things or changes it in any way. It's simply what happened. My dad still thinks it could have been some kind of test craft from the military, but he admits that that seems almost impossible for many reasons. The main one being, it was in broad daylight and over a rural neighborhood. He's also a blue-collar American and very patriotic, and he doesn't believe our military would test some kind of device on a 6-year-old kid riding his bike in the country. My mom has no explanation and doesn't even like talking about it. She's always said it was the scariest thing she's ever seen, especially seeing my brother get hurt like that. She also refuses to call it anything other than that thing. She's rational enough to know it didn't have anything to do with religion or demons, but she doesn't think it was our military either. So that's our family story. I don't know what actually happened that day because I wasn't there, but I've heard it told so many times that I can't just write it off as some kind of made-up story or mass delusion. I firmly believe everything they experienced was real. They all seem to have made peace with the fact that what happened doesn't fit into any box they understand, and they'll never truly know what it was. As a teenager, I was always terrified of aliens, especially the stereotypical image of the gray skin and oversized head with large almond-shaped black eyes. It all deeply unsettled me. To be honest, even now in my 30s, the image of them still creeps me out. A lot of that fear came from recurring dreams I had as a teenager. In my mid-teens, I started having nightmares where I would find myself completely paralyzed in bed. I couldn't move or speak, and I had this overwhelming sense that something just out of sight was responsible for doing this to me. These dreams weren't fleeting moments of fear. They went on for uncomfortably long amounts of time and were filled with panic. They never ended naturally either. It always felt like I was being released from them or like something had let go of me. As I got older, in my late teens and early 20s, the dreams became more vivid and more specific. The panic and paralysis were still there, but now the dreams wouldn't end until whatever was holding me finally came into view. And what I saw consistently were the short, pale-skinned beings that you see in drawings and depictions all over today, although they weren't nearly as common in the media back then. These beings would appear in my room, standing over me and watching, and as soon as they became visible, I would jolt awake in a state of absolute panic. Even after I moved out of my parents' house and into a shared house with friends, the dreams continued. In fact, they got more frequent. It didn't seem to matter where I was, who I lived with, or what was going on in my life. I would still wake up terrified and be left with this strange sensation that something had happened between the moment I saw them and the moment I actually woke up, but I couldn't remember what it was. There was always a gap or a blank space in my memory. I was sure something else happened, but whatever it was had been wiped clean. This pattern went on for years, and by my early 20s, I had come to think of it as a type of adult night terror. I figured it was just my version of a phobia. Some people are terrified of spiders and heights. I had a fear of aliens, and it seemed like something I'd just have to live with. But then things started to change. Around that time, I had started training in martial arts. Not the strip mall karate, but the real kind. It was serious, contact-heavy practical training, the kind where you go home bruised and sore, but with real skills and real confidence. I deeply got into it, and I trained as hard as I could, and over time, the discipline became a major part of my life. The nightmares continued through all of this, along with the same paralysis and panic, but something inside me began to shift. If you've ever trained seriously in a martial art, you've probably heard people say that it changes who you are, and that couldn't be more true. The philosophy behind it starts to seep into your personality and your everyday life. You noticeably see and deal with problems differently. I was training in a very direct, aggressive art and learning how to deal with confrontation without hesitation. That mindset started bleeding into other parts of my life. I became more assertive and even combative in how I approached problems. I no longer ran from conflict, and I wanted to meet it head on. I've mellowed out over time, but back then the shift was very real, and it would turn out to be very important. As my training intensified, so did my responses in the dreams. The paralysis would hit and the fear would come, but instead of being consumed by it, something new started to emerge. Anger, defiance, and a drive to fight back. I still couldn't move at first, but when these beings appeared, the fear transformed into rage. Then there was a night where everything changed. After years of consistent training, my reflexes had become automatic and muscle memory kicked in. That night, I felt the familiar onset of paralysis. The same suffocating fear started to take hold. Then, as the beings approached me in the dream, I struck without even thinking. I lashed out with a reflexive punch at the closest one. The moment I did that, my experience ended and I snapped out of the paralysis instantly. But unlike other times, I was left with a strange feeling that they hadn't managed to completely erase my memory this time. I couldn't recall everything, but I had the clear impression that they had left in a hurry. Whatever happened, it was different. Then came the strangest part of all of this. A few months after I fought back, I had what I can only describe as some kind of simulation. This wasn't a night terror in the usual sense. It felt completely real to me, and I experienced it as though I were awake. In this experience, it was late at night and I was wearing only my boxer shorts, which is what I usually slept in. I turned around and there was a woman attacking me. She was a bit shorter than me, maybe around 5'9", but very muscular. Her skin was unnaturally pale and her eyes looked like dark hollow pits. Her hair was very white blonde and braided tightly across the top of her head. I've never seen anyone quite like her, and she looked like some kind of hybrid human. She lunged at me with this wild aggression, clawing and scratching and trying to bite me. My adrenaline peaked and I remember every detail. At the far end of whatever room I was in, there were tall, gray-like beings watching silently, and for whatever reason, I could tell they were evaluating what was happening. Even with the burst of aggression from this woman, my training kicked in and I was able to handle her quickly. I ended up with her in a kind of chokehold and I could feel her thrashing. Just as I started to tighten up the hold, I woke up back in bed with my heart racing and my adrenaline still pumping. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. Something really changed after that though. The fear I used to feel never returned in the same way. I would still feel uneasy about going to sleep, but not crippled by fear like before. There were times after that where I could feel the old paralysis trying to creep back in, but it was weaker now and I could mostly shrug it off. I genuinely felt like I'd shown whoever was watching that I wasn't afraid anymore. After that, the episodes became less frequent and months would pass without an incident. Just recently though, it came back again, only this time something felt different. I have a young son now who just turned 1, and that night I felt the familiar sensation starting to creep in. But as I began to shake it off, I got a very clear sense that I wasn't the intended target this time. It wasn't about me, it was about my son. I forced myself to fully wake up and immediately went to check on him. He was fine and sleeping peacefully, thank God, but I knew something had tried to come back, and I also knew that I had interrupted it. I haven't had a single experience since that night, and I feel like I sent a clear message. I am not afraid, I'm watching, and I will protect what is mine.